Hey everyone, welcome to 21st Century Saints, our podcast and live stream. I used to say who this was for, but we're having a bit of an existential redefinition at the moment. So yeah, Mormony stuff generally. And I have been so worked up and angry that I just realized I haven't even got my microphone set up or anything. So you're going, my audience, I love you, but all you're going to get tonight is my crappy little laptop audio. But that's okay because I have a light the size of a small sun shining in my face. So, we have been super excited for a really long time. We've wanted to have a catch up with Rebecca Biblioteca, and we have her here in the studio tonight with us. So, hey, Rebecca, it is lovely to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. Your intro music is so pleasant. I wasn't on screen when it was playing, and I was like, I sort of like maybe fell asleep, took a cat nap for like 10 seconds. It's very nice.
This is what we find. We need the Zen moment
Yes.
before we can continue.
Yes.
And it has been brought to my attention with love that as these past few months have been, I've been a little frustrated. I've been a little worked up that I speak quicker, and therefore a huge part of our audience can understand my accent. So I will slow down where I can, and the music is a reminder that I can step into some zen when I when I need to. But yes, Rebecca, you've been podcasting for. I mean, it's actually not that long, right? I mean, it's a while, but it's not that long. You've been doing incredible work. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you into this space? What got you here?
Oh, I'd be happy to. And I'm glad that you also gave me a reminder about not talking so fast. I'm also very guilty of that all the time. It's like even when I play myself like on 2 times audio, it's so fast I can't even understand myself. So I will also slow down. We'll have a nice little moment here. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. During COVID, I had already kind of stepped away from the church a little bit. I've been in for over 5 decades and kind of finally gave my self permission to take a break, and a lot of people I think were like that. They just kind of moved a little past it. But my background is librarianship. I have a master's in libraries and information science, and I worked at the BYU library for quite a number of years. And so during COVID, I started just reading all kinds of books that I hadn't really read before, not necessarily Mormon books, but books about history, science, philosophy, religion, everything, kind of re-educating myself now that I'm out of that silo that a lot of us found ourselves in inside the church. And so I was posting on a post-Mormon Reddit thread about Sapiens. I was reading the book Sapiens. It's back here somewhere. And some other people jumped on and said, "Oh, I've read that book. It's amazing." We started chatting. I mentioned my background in librarianship, and someone said, "Well, I challenge you to start a post Mormon book club." And I'm like, "Well, it's COVID. Nothing else is happening. So I'm going to do it." So I started the Good Book Club about 5 years ago during COVID. And a couple people jumped on to help me. We started this virtual book club where we meet once a month virtually. We read books and we discuss them on a Zoom meeting. It's really fun. So I was trucking along doing that for several years. And we started getting authors, kind of big authors, interested in coming in and talking to the book club. I think they found us fascinating, like a train wreck. Oh, you're post Mormons? You're trying to reconstruct your lives? Ooh, I want to see that. You're using my book. So we started getting these kind of bigger authors coming on. They were so kind. And we started filming them. And we're like, gosh, I wish we had a place we could kind of put this out there. Well, what about a podcast? And my co-founder of the book club, who is my co-host on Mormonish, Landon, he and I were like, well, maybe we can figure this out. We're practically boomers, but let's buy a mic. What about a camera? How does this work? And about a year and a half ago, he came up with the name. He's like, well, we're not in the church anymore, but we're Mormon-ish because we were raised for decades, 5 decades in the church. Culturally, we are Mormons. That's our past. Our children who are young adults are in, our parents are in, our friends are in, some are out. We're all Mormon-ish. We don't ever really leave it, and we're okay with that. And so that's what we talk about on our podcast. And we've had amazing guests. We also have wanted to come and talk with you for a long time too and be on 21st Century Saints. So this is really fun. But yeah, it's been really interesting. And we try to have a, like you say, a kinder, more friendly take on things. We're definitely for post and nuanced Mormons, but we try to give a fair and balanced discussion of everything in the topics that we hit. Like there are certain topics that make us a little spicy, maybe like what we're going to talk about today. But that's kind of how I arrived at where I am, and then just met so many amazing other podcasters in this space that I have the opportunity to go and guest host with them or collaborate, and it's just been incredible, honestly. And I'm sure you find that too. Just the people in this space are amazing.
So much. And I remember sort of watching what was happening during lockdown. I remember that was the moment when I saw, look, there's something happening with women here, especially. And yeah, it's not that there's no men in space, but women seem to be driving this space forward. There are podcasts, there are book clubs, especially the book clubs. What's going on with this? And it was for thinking women who and they kept saying, if only our Relief Societies could be like this, if only our Sunday schools could be like this. And the discussions were so much more robust, and people were expressing, if it was like this for me at church, then maybe I could stay or feel more comfortable. So that was when you kind of come on my radar. I'm like, oh, here we go, right? And you've been part of that big change has been so fascinating to see. And in a lot of ways, you are the Mormon go-to girl for, like, I mean, your analysis is so sharp and smart, and I've been loving it. Before we dive into what we're diving into tonight, could you talk a little bit about what is taking up most of your time right now and the work you're doing around temples and temple building?
Yeah, this has been one of the more interesting parts of podcasting, is that people reach out to us. I was like, me? You're reaching out to me? I'm always just so surprised, right? So about a year and a half ago, somebody from Cody, Wyoming reached out, one of our viewers, and said, there's a temple being built here. And I know there's a residents group. They're saying that some zoning has been changed. Some laws have been changed. Kind of, there's something going on. Would you like to look into this? And I said, well, sure. That sounds like fun. Some of my favorite books growing up were Nancy Drew, right? That really dates me back in the 70s. So I can, investigative journalist, I'm on it. So we started looking into what was happening in Cody. And then some people from Heber Valley, Utah said, well, hey, there's a temple that's proposed in our town, and there's some things going on we don't understand with changing zones. We started looking into Heber. Suddenly, Lone Mountain, Nevada contacts us, McKinney, Texas, Bakersfield, California. Everywhere a temple is being built, obviously, the height of the temple is always the concern. The steeples are just, can I say it, jacked to Jesus. And they're putting them in these residential areas where the codes only allow for a two-story building, a single family dwelling. And they seem to go in and change codes, manipulate city councils. It's a little bit different in every town, but it sure is a playbook that exists, and they use it in different ways. And of course, all of these residents that I work with, they are more than happy to have a temple in the town. They welcome that. It has nothing to do with religious bias, anything like that. They just ask that the LDS Church follow the laws of the land, and that they build the temple somewhere where it's zoned for, instead of going in and manipulating codes and zoning, sometimes before the residents even understand what's happening, to allow that temple to be built there. So all these people are fighting, quote, quote, the temple, but they're not fighting the religion or the people. They respect and admire their LDS neighbors, but they just want the church to follow the laws of the land. So when you look at it like I do from a bird's eye view, in all these different towns, you really see what's happening, and it's pretty fascinating. So if any of you would like to just kind of watch this, we put out podcasts. We have on our YouTube channel, Mormonish, we have playlists. You're probably aware of how to go on YouTube and look at playlists. We have a Temple Watch playlist where we report probably every couple of weeks on what's going on, but boy, is it fascinating. It really is. And I've been Nemo has started to kind of catch the bug on this. And he's a pit bull, so nothing's going to get past him. But he's explained to me that where you guys are, the laws are very locked down as far as what you would be allowed to build. And I have huge respect for that, because people can, be in a home and understand that they're going to be able to keep the infrastructure around them instead of having a giant, I can't even describe to you. Imagine just being in a house and right out your window, where maybe there used to be a mountain or something, there's a massive, huge steeple. And part of this, to be able to legally allow the building to be built, is to prove that the steeple height is the most important part of our LDS religion. So that's a new thing that they're trying to kind of slip into the doctrine. And I think most of you watching right now, if someone were to say to you, is the steeple height on a temple the most important part of the temple? Most of you would say, I've never heard that. I've never learned that. I don't know that. But I'll go on record right here and predict it. You're going to start to see that being slipped into maybe talks, addresses, devotionals, because they need to point to that to prove that the temple must be allowed at the height they want, because it's part of their religious freedom to worship that way. So super interesting to watch. Crazy.
And yes, it is. And we'll put a link in the show notes. Because in so many ways we're kind of shielded from that in the UK. We've seen some stuff, we're aware, and then a bigger story will break when there is coordination and action. But it doesn't really mean a whole lot, because, things are pretty smooth here. But actually, and I think there will be stuff to come about what's happening, with the proposed temples or the planned temples in the UK, because lots of discussions are happening about that. I would definitely be saying watch this space, UK people too. And part of the reason why I wanted you to talk about your work on, coordinating what's happening with temples, is that in many ways it really affects what we're talking to, or it's relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Now, for Sarah and I and Ruth, Alana, when she was with us, safeguarding had just really quickly become one of the most important topics, the thing that people were reaching out to us about. And we find ourselves in a space where people are telling us things that the church seemed to have no idea about, until it turns out that they do have an idea about, and a very good idea about, and that they are actually very coordinated in how they deal with these matters. Then we saw, fairly recently, the financial scandals and things that hit the headlines around the world, and much, much more. So when it comes to speaking about integrity, I want to stress where, maybe take us back a little bit to where I was before this talk was given. And that is Nuance Mormon. I am here for it. And my hope is that if people who have this vision for what the church is, what we thought we were signing up for, then the church can be what we need it to be, because these, opinions, they are not going to be able to survive forever. They are not godly. If people who are trying to, create a better church are here, then it will be safer for LDS people who do have questions, who, we are the people who can, the least little thing, right? In these classes, I bet you were the same, Rebecca. If someone makes a comment that's a little bit slightly, are you being a little bit supportive of LGBTQ stuff here? Because if so, I will raise my hand and I will support your comment, and we were always sort of on the watch for where we could speak out, or where we more often would have to say, well, actually, I don't really agree. There's this other perspective. I know that you feel we're so kind to the LGBTQ community, but have you noticed that there are no members of that community here? Does that maybe mean something? And, things like that. And so we tried to be those people for so long. I am very conscious of the fact that I stayed during the policy of exclusion turnaround, that I've stayed witnessing times that have been really horrific. I mean, the things that have been reported to us, the depth of feeling on LGBTQ matters, the things that Sisters in Zion do a fantastic job of highlighting, that there's still no apology for mistreatment and racist policies. We're still waiting for that day to happen. And I think in many ways there is sort of, there was a bit of a, it was beneficial to be able to raise our hand in those classes and say, well, as a member, as a Temple Recommend holder, or whatever it may be, that we were part of that in group, we spoke that same language. Now, that's where I was up to, keeping in mind staying for some of the most horrific talks. And I'm so conscious that it can seem like a bit of a kick in the teeth when this is the one that the white girl thought was too much. So I want to, if it's okay, have a chat about what kind of happened. When this talk was being given, I had no language to talk about how it made me feel, which is one of the reasons why I thought, Rebecca, we need Rebecca, because the words are causing pain. Help us give voice to that. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to go to the talk just now, and maybe we could kind of skim through it.
Yeah.
Would that be all right?
Yeah.
Rebecca,
And could I just say, it's really funny because when you told me what talk you wanted to discuss, I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. It was just one of many. I mean, I had heard it. It wasn't until I started reading it again, and I think I texted you and said, okay, I just threw my highlighter. Now I've thrown the talk on the floor. Yeah, it's very innocuous. It's kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's hidden until you really drill down. And then you're right. It's absolutely at the core of everything. So yes, let's go through it.
a wolf in sheep's clothing talk is exactly how I would define it. And yeah, so we'll go through it. Not quite close reading, but I kind of feel like we hate lessons where they just read through the talk and comment through the talk. And I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but in this case, there's value, I promise. Well, kind of, but not the value we thought we were going to get. So this talk was given in the most recent conference, and it's by Elder Jack N. Gerard of the 70. Now, I am not going to say anything about his background, his career, because it's not relevant to me in that moment, although people have sort of brought it up and on the interwebs it does get discussed. The title that was subsequently released is just, this is weird for me. Integrity, a Christ-like attribute. Now, even that title, right? Now that title, and it's like love, a Christ-like attribute. This word Christ-like, an attribute, and then before it, we'll take some kind of value and we'll smudge it all together. So I think what really frustrates me about it is you can pick any word and make it a Jesus word, except when it comes to love, integrity, grace, peace, those things are Jesus. They're not a bit like Jesus. They are not something that's a particular little, even calling Jesus Christ-like, I feel like you're going to talk about Jesus and we're going to start with, hey, this is a bit Christ-like. And we love to talk. Young women's classes used to do this a lot, the Christ-like values and all of these things. And actually, yes, and so much more. But I really struggle even with how the title is framed, because I feel like we start off with not understanding Christ. Anyway, he kicks off by talking about how in the closing hours of the Saviour's ministry, he went to the Mount of Olives, into the garden, and he goes through the bleeding at every pore moment, asking not to drink the bitter cup. Yet in the moment, quote, of deep despair, the Saviour did not shrink, but partook and finished his preparations unto the children of men. As the only begotten of the Father, Jesus Christ had power over death, pain, and suffering, but did not shrink. He fulfilled the covenant he had made with his Father, and in doing so Jesus manifested a Christ-like attribute. Well done, Jesus, you did it. An increasingly important attribute in the world in which we live, the attribute of integrity. He remained true to God, to each of us, and to his divine identity. Rebecca, you can see this starting right here, can't you, in this opener?
Yeah, as soon as I read the first paragraph, I said, okay, I see where you're going. And I'm surprised at myself that I didn't pick it up when I was, and I know that I wasn't focusing when I was actually listening or watching conference, because you're usually doing other things. And it's different when you read. But yeah, I saw exactly where they were going. And that's the key right there. He was true to God. Okay, that can be subjective depending on who you think God is and who God is talking to you through. That's the key right there. To each of us, that means our treatment of our fellow man. As soon as I said that, I thought, okay, I definitely see where this is going. And then your divine identity. They mentioned that a few times. So I was really curious to see how they would all put this together. But yes, I knew that this would definitely be something where they were reinterpreting words and using wiggle words as they often do. And so I thought after that first paragraph, it doesn't bode well.
Do we want to maybe just kind of allude a little bit, just kind of not massively so, because this is the least destructive part of the talk,
Right.
But the fact that Jesus he's most often portrayed across all of Mormonism as this kind of Jesus who does this, even though he has this moment of shrinking from it, but he does it anyway. And the key message is obedience. We can pull in integrity sometimes, we can pull in love sometimes, we can pull in, something, whatever it is we want to highlight, but it is always going to come back to obedience. And actually, that's where he is going to go in the talk, is because you told God you would do it. So you're going to see this through, even if it kills you. So when we're talking about the relationship that Jesus has with God, I just maybe naively kind of thought that any action Jesus takes, the integrity, if it is your commitment, because you know who you are, you have a sense of your core beliefs and identities, you know what your values are, and you are seeing through something that you committed to do because you chose to do it. It's this, and integrity is seeing something through, right? Is remaining true to your values. When it's made to be about obedience to God, I think it loses something really, really important. And I actually kind of want to come back later on in the talk to what I think it is that it's missing. Gerard then goes on to talk about integrity, about Jesus Christ. He says, Jesus Christ is our exemplar. Living a life of integrity requires us to be true to God, true to each other, and true to our divine identity. Integrity flows from the first commandment to love God. Because you love God, you are true to him at all times. You understand that there is right and wrong, and there is absolute truth, God's truth. Integrity means we do not lower our standards or behavior to impress or to be accepted by others. You do what is right and let the consequence follow. Recent revisions to Preach My Gospel missionary manual notably added integrity as a Christ-like attribute. Do you have any thoughts, Rebecca?
Well, I wonder if they added it just so they could give a talk like this and lock people down anymore.
Because
I'm a
that's what we
conspiracy
do.
theorist. Yeah. No, I do have thoughts on that because again, and we'll get to, I think later, President Kimball's definition of integrity, which I thought was pretty correct. There it was. The problem is they are now introducing this idea that integrity means being true to yourself and doing what God wants. They're assuming that's the same thing. But here's this sort of a third party inserted into this equation, which is what the church wants you to do. The church, speaking for God, tells you what to do. So I again bring up a very obvious example, like you said, the exclusion policy, where the church tells you that's what God wants you to do. You may feel morally that you are not on board with this at all. Your job then is to wrestle with it like Christ did in the garden until you find yourself aligned with what the church is telling you God wants you to do. So you're basically, it's a way for you to override your moral sensibilities and your own sense of conscience. And in that way, you can you can be on board with horrible mistreatment, and still say that you're a person of integrity. It's just this very strange workaround formula.
I this is the moment, this is how quickly it happens that I start to have this visceral reaction. Um, I am so conscious of the fact that the reason why you start a book group, the reason why you start doing all this stuff with temples, the reason why you podcast, it's hard work, right? I mean, you could be chilling out doing all of these other things, right? Sarah and I, we keep talking about, oh, will someone come and teach us boundaries, please? Because this ends up becoming your whole life. Latter-day Saints give their whole lives. We give up friendship relationships because they don't seem to align with values, because we can't seem to make it work. Our whole lives are church-centered. When we are occupying a space because of our integrity, this isn't a done thing. Do you know how hard it is for Mormon women to do something that a priesthood holder didn't tell them to do, that someone somewhere doesn't ultimately have authority over? It is so hard for us to get our heads around. And if you've managed to find the key to that, then good on you. But, reconstructing that is the work of a lifetime. So if integrity is what keeps us here, and at any moment, someone can tell us, that I'm not sure. I don't want to say too much about it, but you don't have that approval. Those are the things that sort of end up coming into conflict. That's what God's will is. It's even the withholding of really simple things.
Yeah.
So really quickly, I realized, but hold on, we're all staying because we made a commitment, because we feel like it's acting with our integrity to stay here under these conditions. That these are terms we can testify of things that we have confidence in, that we can oppose, that we can be the supportive group, we can be the safe place. We do that because of integrity. But if you're telling me that you can decide at any point because God said, that's not integrity. Now, because I'm going to refer to this later on, I've got a little sort of thing to share. By the time we get to the end of the talk, and I made my decision later on that night that I was going to resign my membership based on this talk. I announced it on Nemo's show. I'd literally sent the email 10 minutes before I shared with Nemo's audience that that's what I was doing. When my family are like, okay, hey, what's going on? So my wonderful family member who serves in the British Army, whose values are really important in the military, and when he asked what's up, I was like, oh, because they're just redefining integrity now. And he's like, redefining integrity? Well, if you redefine integrity, that means you don't have integrity. That's what integrity is. That's what it does. And I wanted to share this little moment because this is the thing that I hold on to throughout the rest of this talk. So, and this is the British freaking Army, an organization which is constantly trying to do better and be better and has so many faults and flaws, but it'll hold up integrity as something it's trying to stay in line with. You can be in the military, you can be sacked on the spot if you're failing to meet this one value. Integrity. Be honest with yourself and your teammates. Integrity means being honest, not lying, cheating, stealing. If you lack integrity, your teammates cannot trust what you say or do. They cannot rely on you, and your team will suffer. You must look after your integrity, as like trust, once it's lost, it takes a long time to earn back, if ever. Now, that explanation of integrity made me think about, okay, well, if we apply that to what Jesus is, that relationship of prayer with God. He told God, you can count on me. He told God that I will see this through, even though it's going to be really hard. If you're bringing integrity into it, he's made a commitment that he is not going to let us down. It was about us, therefore, if we're going to explore integrity in that context. Then there's also the fact, and like I say, this is all happening very, very quickly. You're standing up there talking about integrity when we've had no apologies for any of the poor behaviors from our church leaders, any of the immoral and illegal behaviors, any of the breaches of the law from any of our church leaders. This is not acceptable, and that is not what integrity is. But I hold on through the rest of the talk in the hope that maybe this might be our President Uchtdorf moment. Maybe he will acknowledge that we get it wrong sometimes. Okay.
No, I love that moment. I love that someone could see it so clearly. Well, if you try to redefine integrity, you don't have integrity. But there's this idea that what the church is asking of you is almost beyond integrity. I mean, now they're trying to redefine it. I had a discussion with a family member. I rarely talk to my faithful family members about anything that I do. And I was talking about some of the temple issues because there were just some, to me, pretty egregious things that had come out. And I was saying to this family member, do you think it's okay that they did this legal workaround? Do you think it's okay that they told their residents to do this and this? And this family member said, whatever it takes. None of that bothers me. Whatever it takes, the temple must be built, whatever it takes. And I said, but you realize that these are probably illegal, if not extremely questionable moves that they're, whatever it takes, this family member said. And so in this family member's mind, building the temple was more important than the integrity of following the law or any of these processes or the treatment of people in these towns where it's being built. So that kind of gives you a window into, I don't know, I kind of like, I call it sort of the Nephi Laban scenario. It's whatever it takes, whatever has to be done, whether there's integrity involved in not. And now with this talk, you can actually have those points of view. You can carry out those things and still consider yourself a person of integrity because you're almost living a higher lie. It's what God, through the church, wants you to do. And so you are still a person of integrity, although these things are happening that, as your relative said, that's not really something that someone of a person of integrity would do.
I mean, this kid's a little punk and he's teaching me about integrity. I'm a Mormon, how very dare you? But to have that moment when it's laid bare in front of you. And I actually think that it's not a unique worldview, the whatever it takes worldview. If God wants something to happen, then clearly that is the right thing, and anything that stands in the way of that would then be Satan's work. So if we need to oppose that, so we can write anything else off as opposition, as that's just Satan, and we even personify it. We've even got this sort of, it's more than othering, it's it's demonizing people who would possibly disagree that this is the right thing to do. I mentioned Elder Uchtdorf's the church has made mistakes moment, which was incredible. Elder Gerard is going to had the audacity to draw upon Elder Uchtdorf's name. How dare you? Just in a moment.
Sacrilegious.
A number of years ago, Elder Uchtdorf, His Holiness, was assigned to reorganize our stake. During our interview, he asked me a question I have not forgotten. Has there been anything in your life that, if brought to attention of the public, would be an embarrassment to you or the church?
I have such a problem with that question even. That's not even asking if you're an honest person or honest in your dealings. Just make sure you don't embarrass the church. Oh, I have such a problem with that question.
Do we need to brief the PR room? Do we need to have a statement good to go? Do we need to have the lawyers look over some stuff? Because we can do that.
Yeah, we can do that. We've done it before.
Surprised, my mind quickly raced over my entire life, trying to recall those moments when I may have fallen short. Ugh. And asking myself, if others knew everything I had done, what would they think of me or the church? You know, this is the moment when I want this should be the doorway to humility, right? That's the moment when because we've all been put in an office with a church leader who's saying, "Hey, what have you really done? What is really going on in there? Anything that's not been resolved with priesthood authority?" And we're all thinking, "Okay, I'm crap, but how crap am I?" And we're all we it just it's such a power imbalance, and it's not,
Mhm.
it's not strengthening, it's
Yep.
not we're not feeling awesome in those moments. If others knew everything I had done, yeah, I'm really hoping he's gonna say, "Yeah, I really suck and I need to do better." But he he just doesn't really give us anything. He doesn't
No.
bring himself back down to humanity or earth, or because we don't want to be human, right? We don't want to allow we want to squish out all of the humanity, squish out all of the sin, and turn it all off. He said, "In the moment, I thought Elder Uchtdorf was only asking about worthiness, but I've come to understand it was really a question about integrity. Was I true to what I professed? Would the world see consistency between my words and my deeds? Would others see God through my conduct?" Um, so we're all sitting there thinking about the SEC ruling and the things that are constantly coming up in our feeds that leaders once said, but now it's not a thing anymore. And like quotes from the 20s that are coming back into fashion again because they suit political purposes. There's a lot of that. But that's okay. That's okay because he's gonna allude to that in a moment, right? President Spencer W. Kimball taught, he goes on, integrity is our willingness and ability to live by our beliefs and commitments. There you go. If he could have just read out that quote,
Yeah.
that would have been fine.
Yeah, I thought that was fine. That was just fine, and it said, "Live by our beliefs, your personal moral compass, your personal moral code," right? And your commitments. What have you committed to do? But, yeah, I feel like I can't believe they had the nerve to even say most of this talk out loud, given the track record. But then again, a lot of faithful members are not really aware of the track record, or if there is something that kind of pricks their conscience like the SEC, it's explained away, um, pretty easily, right? "Oh, they explained that. Oh, it was this. Oh, it was that." So a lot of people don't think that through and they don't understand the culpability that's there. But yeah, I agree. What President Kimball said, that is integrity. Now they're going to redefine it.
Yeah, so I feel like, and I love that the comments are looking at this too. Up until this point, we're seeing a difference between what the church says and does.
Mhm.
We are working out in our minds how we can make that work with when we know that people have been told not to report abuse, when the legalities around situations are, if there is a loophole, the church is well aware of it. The church has been on the wrong side of history so many
Yeah.
times, and and then has sort of looked around and carried on like nothing has happened. Hasn't Will make it very clear it's not going to bow to anything progressive, or that things may need to change, or that things will change, which is actually, I think, where he's going to go in this talk next. But yeah, he says a life of integrity requires us to first and foremost be true to God. Does it? No, I mean, maybe we should have called this, "Can atheists really have integrity?"
We should have called it that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I'm going to say no to that one, but that's okay because, sometimes we get caught up in you're speaking to a Mormon audience. For us, even for us, being true to our values, he's equating to being true to God, being true to the essence and core of what we know to be right. If Latter-day Saints are being taught that that is ultimately what comes from God, we've now fully conflated the two. They are absolutely, at this point in the talk, the same thing. We've cemented that. He talks about Daniel and his integrity in the lion's den, and the king came to know God through Daniel's integrity. Others see God through ours, words and deeds. Just like Daniel, being true to God will increasingly set us apart from the world.
Mm. Yeah, that's the first time they say it, isn't it? That you may have to do things that others are going to see as not very nice and not great. But if you have integrity, you're going to do them. I think about this quote that I always like from Max von Sydow. He's an actor, a philosopher, and he said, if Jesus Christ were to come back today and see what was happening in the world, he would never stop in his name. He would never stop throwing up in his name. That's the key, right?
Right,
It
right.
is. I mean, you can follow God. Which God? Which God that says what? What is God making you do? I can bring up so many examples that maybe we'll get to later, but your personal moral code, your personal integrity, that should allow you to even look at and dissect what your religion is telling you to do, what your religion is telling you God wants to do. I mean, I brought up to you before that I have a direct ancestor who was in the Mountain Meadows massacre, right? He was one of the perpetrators, a shooter and clubber. He's on the federal arrest warrant. Well, his religion, speaking for God, told him to murder, and this is an extreme example, of course, women and children. He was a normal person, joined a religion, goes.
Sorry, we just had a little internet bump right at this really powerful moment.
Ooh, no, I think somebody's watching. No, but again, it's an extreme example. But again, a normal person joins a religion, becomes part of a religious, microcosm in society that's isolated. And in his mind, God told him and told his religion and instructed him to commit what most of us would consider the most extreme human atrocity. And yet his integrity told him to do this for the sake of the church and keeping the church alive and protecting the church. So that's an extreme example. But of course, we can all think of everyday kinds of examples. And this word, set us apart, it means that you will have to do things. Like I have a personal example. This is a very personal example. I have a family wedding coming up of a child. So my child is told through his church and integrity that I can't attend. So I'm not going to be able to attend. He's doing what's right for him, for he and his fiance, for his belief, for what he believes his church and his God are going to tell him. But other people might look at that and say, well, that's not very nice. Again, you're set apart. You're doing something different than what anyone else in the world is going to understand. And that's why I took that sentence to be, okay, what are they going to say next? Because here they warn people, you're going to be at odds with a lot of people with the things that we're going to ask you to do.
And so while it's not in the same vein, when people are so sure that God is telling them to do something, and yes, that was an extreme example,
Yes.
which was part of church history. That's
Yes.
what actually happened. Those were real people that really did occur, and similar things have occurred that have been extremely serious because in a church context, a Latter-day Saint context, God told them to do it. Make that more broad. We see it across the world. It's part of world history. But in addition to that, we see people today who it's more comfortable to not challenge our feelings. If you feel a little bit uncomfortable, then, well, God helps us to know what's right. So we should feel good. And so if we don't feel really good about something, then that means either don't do it or that maybe it's sinful. That's why it's that principle that causes people not to report. It's what causes bishops to want things to go away. It's what causes us to hold on to what may seem like safe options in the moment, which are actually conflict avoidant moments, and you're not dealing with an actual situation. But I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's most of my obsessions and compulsions are very mental. They're sort of are very sort of inward facing, that no one would really notice. And when there's a spike, often I'm way down the line before anyone has actually sort of realized. So, I've mentioned before, if it's this feeling of wrongness, right, that I think as Latter-day, if I put that into church words, into church talk words, it would make sense. So the feeling of being wrong, of being out of alignment. I can't feel God. I can't feel that this is the right thing. But when I lift my knee up, if I have to swallow, if I lift my knee up and keep it higher than this knee, that feels right. That feels godly. Now, that isn't God. That's thoughts and compulsions and things that help me to feel safe and in control. And I need to challenge those thoughts and that type of thinking. And while I'm not, maybe I am kind of saying, where does mental illness begin and God end? Like, where's the line there? But it is important in life that we rely on our feelings to, we get these indicators to know who is the person we want to date, and how do we know when we don't want to date them anymore, how we make life decisions, what's the right job for us. These things aren't all purely devoid of any feeling, but we have to have some kind of logical approach to God. It has to coexist with values and what we've been taught, and that it has to coexist with what we know is the right thing to do. And so when he is just talking about how, the king heard what Daniel was saying and his words and actions convinced him, well, actually, people across the world are telling us that you're being really weird right now, and that this is not okay, and you're being kind of homophobic, and also maybe you should say sorry for doing crap, and maybe don't break the law. And we don't get people saying, we don't get from the pulpit people saying, don't kill your wives, don't try and go into tax avoidance schemes. There's so many things that other people can recognize much more quickly. What we get told is that everyone sees Mormons and thinks they're so wonderful. These are the good guys. These are the helping guys. Actually, I don't know anyone who's really saying that, because
No.
we've got such a bad reputation out there. So yes, and that's, I think, what's increasingly setting us apart from the world. And it's a worrying thing, not a good thing. And so he's very much leaning into this othering, the classic, classic general conference. We're over here, the world is over there, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
And he has to prepare us, I think, to be apart from the world and to be seen as not doing what I think again about our temples that we work with. So I've worked with 5 different towns and their residents who are not LDS. And they all start out the same way. They're like, oh, they're building a temple in our town. We are church going people, the residents, different denominations. These LDS people are church going people. I think we can work this out. I think we can figure this out. We can, go through the steps and come to a common consensus because we are church going people and so are they. Within a couple months, across the board, they all say, who are these people? What is this? I don't think this is a church. This seems like something else. They're not acting like a church. Is this a corporation? Who is this? What are they doing? I mean, right away across the board, they come to this conclusion that this is something different. These people are doing something different. It's been really interesting to see it. Again, I'm a fly on the wall of all these different places, but all over, they've arrived at this. These people are acting in this very different way. And then that sets up this very interesting scenario where the church members act in this certain way because the church is doing these things. The church's members feel they must defend what the church is doing, regardless of whether they think it's really okay. They're probably struggling. In a lot of these towns with the temple, there are members that are like, I don't think this is great the way we're treating our neighbors.
Yeah.
But they're in this position where they have to defend, right? They have to come out and very vocally defend. And so then they're in this position where then they feel persecuted. Then that validates, oh, we're being persecuted for the church, then that reinforces, being in but not of the world, like you said, being a part. So it's just this very strange cycle where I almost feel like I had this theory that perhaps these temples are being built in these places where they don't belong and there's opposition, so that members can feel that persecution and have to double
Mm.
down on being on board with whatever the church is telling them. I think about a situation in Heber, Utah. It was brought up at conference, the same conference where this talk was given. One of the general authorities said, our youth love the temple. 300 of them showed up at a city council meeting on the lawn. They showed up to show their support, to sing, to show that the temple must be built. Well, what he didn't tell is that the church had sent out a letter to the stakes, to all the young men and young women presidents that said, hey, cancel your regular young men, young women activities and come down to the city building. We're going to have food trucks, ice cream, pizza, and treats. Bring your kids here. They can have these treats. And then, of course, the assumption is that then the kids would sing songs about the temple and they'd be there for the temple. But it's not as simple as they make it sound. In conference, 300 kids showed up as their own volition to support the temple. No, food trucks, pizza, ice cream. So again, it's just the scenario where the church wants you to do a certain thing. You have to do it. You get on board. If you face opposition, that reaffirms more to you that it's important that you do that. And that's what God wants you to do. So I don't know. Have you noticed that? It's a very strange, vicious, almost cycle that I see.
I think because the UK things are looking a bit different here, because if we try to raise 300 members of the church in general, that might
Not
be
going to happen.
it might be a bit tricky. But I mean,
Right.
to be fair here, because there is not anymore, because we were getting a temple in Scotland. But at the moment, the youth are having to travel, a minimum of 4-5
Right.
hours, and they're staying overnight. So there's this whole investment, and it almost
Yes.
becomes sort of, those sort of rites of passage where there's this sort of separation, you're away from your community and you're engaging in something that's symbolic and,
Right.
there's ritual involved. So actually, I think in many ways, the temple is, something that, kids, I think, would show up without the need for ice cream trucks here.
It was
But
a moment on the news, right? You got to get that footage. You got to get that shot of all the people.
yeah,
So,
it's
yeah.
and that's why people would see that here in the UK and believe it, because that our kids love the temple.
Yeah.
And yes, and also they also are very good at seeing the problems. And in the talk, he's going to go on to sort of again pull in the imagery of God versus the God versus the world. He says the oppositional pull of this world is an essential part of God's plan of salvation. How we respond to the pull is the essence of who we are, a measure of our integrity. The worldly pull can be as direct, good grief, as to destroy fidelity in marriage, or as subtle as posting anonymous comments critical of church doctrine or culture. And exercising integrity in our choices is an outward expression of an inner commitment to follow the Saviour Jesus Christ. Okay, first of all, other than the world is bad, the church is safe, I kind of am almost, I think I am with the statement, how we respond to that pull can be a measure of our integrity. I think that sounds like an accurate statement. There has to be that tension. That's how we figure out where our values are. We try things on, and if they don't work, is this a value that I have, or is this something that was handed to me,
Mhm.
or is this not important to me at all? So I think that tension there. Yeah, I don't like the way it's framed, but then he goes on to, now I'm waiting for him to say something really innocuous, like, being an online troll. It is bad to be a troll online. That would have been fine. But no, we're going to compare. The worldly pool can mean that, yeah, you're gonna have affairs in your marriage, and it may be even not as bad as that. It might just be, those sometimes people who say things about church culture online. That's not very good. Oh, it just. We can't criticize church culture. Rebecca, help me, help me. I'm spiraling.
There's no help. There's no help for it. No. And I don't do things anonymously. I put my face on it. But again, I feel like I'm just bringing up issues. There are real issues and they can be addressed. They could be addressed from all sides, but by not speaking out, especially when, your protection of children and all of that, that's the hugest issue. That if more people had spoken out, okay, be critical online. A lot of damage could have been stopped, and I have a huge problem with that, absolutely. But yeah, just this idea that they're just priming people to understand that what they're going to be asked to do, what they call following Jesus Christ, which is what the church interprets what God or Jesus want you to do, is going to be unpopular, and you're going to have the integrity to do the unpopular thing, to do the thing that might be viewed negatively by the rest of the world, but you're actually doing what God and Jesus want you to do. And I think of, talking about the child endangerment, I think of Arizona, right? The case in Arizona, which you all followed so carefully, and I think about how many men, bishops and stake presidencies that knew of the situation, and high counselors. I mean, I think we added it up. It was like 18 men that knew about this horrific scenario of the most egregious child abuse that you could ever imagine. And yet they all went home and they all went to bed at night and they knew what was happening. That takes a lot to override that moral compass in your heart. It takes a lot. And it's talks like these that give you the tools to be able to do it. They allow you to gaslight yourself, to justify it somehow, to override what any human being anywhere on the street, having heard that man's story in Arizona, would have tried to do something, So this kind of a talk is exactly that. It's kind of inoculating you to your own sense of morality, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really appreciating these moments where I get to frame, and there are words for how that horrible feeling has affected me, because all I could do at that time was say, no, this is not okay. This is not who I am. This is not what I committed to. This is not what the church is about. This is not what God is about. These are not my values. One of the things that Sarah was, God blessed be her holy name, was do before we do any presentation, not just to church leaders about safeguarding, but to any organization, whether that's a charity or, politicians or a statutory agency. We have to spend quite a lengthy time talking about church culture. And there is a reason for that. That if you're going to work with a group of people who communicate in specific ways, and much of this will be contextual, you need to know the mind of a Mormon before you know that they are going to be very comfortable with the idea of worthiness, that they are going to be seeking approval, that they will be particularly aware of men and authority. And if it's perceived that someone has authority over them, it puts them in a slightly more vulnerable power dynamic. Women who may be counseled to stay in abusive marriages. Now, none of these things are church doctrine. None of these things are current church policy, but we have to spend, and I would say the lion's share of our time when we're explaining in our work, before we even get to here is what you can do to make things better, or here's some, some things that we would like you to think about, we have to provide so much information. Any time we've spoken to any leader, and this is without exception, they have all been in agreement that church culture and the church are very different things. There are things that are unhealthy about church cultures, whether it's something as simple as, how we celebrate a child's baptism by having a party, how we hand sacrament, and you remember boys were suddenly holding their arms up their backs with their right hand while they had the left hand while they had their, the trays in front. There's always a little thing that'll come out, and these cultural shifts. So when we talk about church culture, it's because we really need to challenge things that creep in that are unhealthy. Who was it? Boyd K. Packer, I think, was speaking about the unspoken rules, the things that we should know, that we eventually get to know, but no one actually spells them out. It comes across so loud and clear, and particularly when it comes to challenging authority, people struggle to do it. And I can't emphasize how important that is. I know that Sarah would have so much to say about this, because like I say, when we first got into this space, her first point is, and if you're teaching safeguarding, you want to do good safeguarding, one of the first things you have to do in your wards, your stakes, or wherever you're teaching it, good training, you have to start with talking about church culture, where you're at just now, why women don't feel safe to speak in certain contexts, what is going on behind the scenes there. Tons of stuff. Okay. But now we can't criticize that. It's in a general conference talk. We can't even talk about it, or that's showing a lack of integrity. Okay.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And that's why this talk is sort of the root of everything. Honestly, you've hit on it right there.
It is the root of everything. Absolutely. So unless there's anything else you sort of want to pull out of here, he's going to just pretty much go on and keep building this us against the world. The church view of integrity is what God wants. We are speaking and telling you what God wants. Likewise, now there's a part where he says, saying we have integrity is insufficient if our actions are inconsistent with our words. Likewise, Christian kindness is not a substitute for integrity. As a covenant people and as leaders of his church, we must be beyond reproach and aligned with the standards the Lord has set. And I'm looking at
just going to read that. I just pulled that up to read. Yeah, that's probably the worst. That's probably the most horrifying statement of the entire talk, if I can say that. Oh my goodness.
Right. Talk to me about it. Christian kindness is not a substitute for integrity. What is he really saying there?
Well, he's saying that we are going to have to be very unchristlike in the name of Christ in certain ways when the church tells you to do it. That could be the LGBTQ community. That could be, I mean, I can think of so many different examples. And he's just got it so wrong. I listened to RFM's little summary of this talk. Did you have a chance to listen to that? He does that conference takedown.
No, because if everyone in the Mormon world knows that there's a competition between RFM,
you have to listen to Nemo.
So I'm bound by a contract that I'm not allowed to listen.
See, I was on Nemo for conference, so I have to do both of them. I've never listened to conference as much as I do now, more on the other side of Mormonism. So, what? He didn't make me sign one, not yet, but I did get to be on. It was really fun. No, RFM makes this great point. Throughout this article, he keeps saying, you've got love of God and then love your neighbor. And he keeps getting it wrong and saying you can't love your neighbor at the expense of, not loving God in the right way. And RFM's like, you don't understand. You love God by loving your neighbor. You enact the second commandment. You love your neighbor, and in that way, you love God. But this article twists it in this Frankenstein-like sense where this allegiance to God here, and I use the word love so loosely because it really is allegiance. And
Yeah.
again, God telling the church what you need to do, that supersedes everything. And if those two come into conflict, you know what you need to do. It's the love or acceptance of, people that needs to be put aside and put second for this love or this authority that you have to give to God and do what they say. And that's what's wrong, the root of the whole article. And by doing that, you have integrity. Somehow they've
Yeah.
twisted it to mean that.
They are literally redefining it right before our eyes.
Mhm.
And I love what you're saying. When we have these visions of, the Givenses, the God who weeps, when that's being presented to us, there are these stunning things about, okay, I mean, wherever you stand with the pearl of great price, I mean, there's a
Mhm.
stunning moment, and God is crying because, they can't love me, but they could at least love each other. But they can't
Mhm.
even do that. They can't even love each other. God actually doesn't seem to be seeking worship. Neither does Jesus. None of. I think this is the thing that I'm really struggling with. That, to me, because we've made this difference between us and the world, and when you're talking about these sort of differences of values, you're talking about the things that we all know what you mean. You're speaking in code about
Yes.
LGBTQ groups.
Mhm.
You're speaking about people who are advocating for equal rights, who would like progressive values reflected because that's what they feel God would want. Um, you're calling that out, and you're suggesting that we lack integrity
Yes.
if we are showing Christian kindness.
Yeah.
So Christ's kindness, Christ's love is not a substitute for integrity. So if he is love, if he is kindness, if he is those things, Christ did not make it about God wasn't making it about him in those moments, right?
Right.
And going back to what the British Army are saying, it says integrity is quite simply doing the right thing, which is what we've actually been calling for the church to do for such a long time now. I say there are so many of us asking for it in different ways. Do the right thing. A person of integrity is enduringly honest and is driven by ethical principle. Openness and honesty are essential to trust and the functioning of the chain of command. Now, when we think about a hierarchical church, even if that is something that we were all buying into, which, let's face it, we are not all buying into, you want to be open and honest, but there are all of these problems. We can still see it. If you want us to value you as leaders, as someone that we can look up to, then you have to demonstrate these things for yourself. And that will include being kind to my trans kid. That will include not marginalizing my disabled kid. That will include not ignoring people who make us feel uncomfortable, not excommunicating people who, have literally committed no sin. It goes on to say officers and soldiers must have complete trust in each other. Their lives may ultimately depend on it. Any lapse in integrity calls into question whether an individual can be relied upon and thus trusted. Integrity also sets the tone of relationships. It's a significant factor in our relationship with other armies and beyond the immediate military environment, including with civil society and family members. Integrity and the public trust that comes with it is a hard-won quality which is easily lost. And centering your life in selfishness, and we see this selfless act. I mean, this talk was framed against this, the most selfless act. But in order to be loyal to this organization, we have to put the selflessness aside and make it about what you want. there is something so twisted happening there that I'm receiving a better lesson in integrity from kid soldiers, actual kids. It's depressing to me. Rebecca, is there anything else we want to pull out of this talk?
Well, I think, yeah, I think what you just said, learning a better lesson, I would hope that people would read this talk. It would not sit well with them exactly. And they might have a reaction, and it might make them redefine integrity in their mind. Like they might read this and say, this isn't quite right. I don't, maybe they don't specifically know why they feel that way, but it might help them think about what integrity really is to them. And I look at the conclusion here that I'm reading. I, of course, have a piece of paper here. I'm old school. I'm not like you with your monitor. But it says conclusion, the big word here. And it says, may we reconcile ourselves to the will of God. That's in quote. And develop Christ-like attributes, the Christ-like attribute of integrity. So at the very end, they're saying, you just have to get on board. And the will of God is what the LDS Church is telling you God wants. So reconcile yourself. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sit well with you, what they're asking you to do. You just have to get on board. You have to do it. And we're going to redefine that as then you have integrity. So we're going to give you a workaround in your head that you can think, okay, I don't feel great about it, but I promised and I have integrity. So even they admit it. Reconcile yourself. You've just got to be okay with it. You have to do it. Whether it's my ancestor in the Mountain Meadows, or it's somebody not letting someone come see them get married, whether it's a priesthood ban, where when that's lifted, you hear people saying, oh, I was hoping they'd do that. I never was on board with that, right? Did you ever say anything about it? No. All those situations like that, you just have to reconcile, and you have to do the unpopular thing. And that brings you closer to God, closer to the church, and makes you a better member of the church. So I don't know.
I feel like I'm going to keep in my heart, and I'm gonna write them down as well, because there's something that I'm going to be thinking about a lot. Reconcile yourself and be okay with it. I went on to spend the rest of conference. There'll be something, right? There will be something, because the message that I was getting loud and clear was how, horrific this was. I felt sick. I felt uneasy. I couldn't, I literally wanted to crawl out of my skin. And I am thinking to myself, you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to do it. Reconcile yourself. You're going to have to do it. And the rest of conference, I wasn't going to give it a whole weekend, because I could not have lived in that space any longer. Fortunately, I got to catch up with my contractual mate, Nemo, who, I worked on this stuff. I wanted to find something to hold on to, and it couldn't give me that. Conference could not give me that. Despite knowing there was a temple on the way, despite, will I feel bad if this happens this weekend? Will I regret it? In my core, from my heart, absolutely not. By that night, that's the thing that I think I kept hearing. My takeaway from this talk is exactly what you said. Reconcile yourself. Just do it. And so, I just did it. And so many people had gotten in touch to say this was their what the hell talk. What? People who were going to be asking questions, having their stake presidents explain it to them. I'm going to go speak to my bishop about this. I'm going to have to think about this one. I don't know how to feel about it. A lot of people were struggling with it. And so while I'm conscious of the fact that there will be many more harmful talks and policies likely still to come, I hope there won't be. I will be here for them, and we will analyze them and still try and provide a safe place. But you do not get to take integrity away from anyone. And we will continue to push back against church culture, because culture's culture. Culture will change. Culture is significant, and when it's harmful, absolutely should be called out. At one point, it was cultural to be able to discipline your child using methods that today are illegal in Scotland. Corporal punishment is no longer legal here. It's not offensive to call out culture, especially where that culture causes harm, or even just where we see things can be done maybe a little bit better. I kind of think that's what we had in mind when we signed up to the church, when we committed to it. The whole idea of lots of great and important things still to be revealed. I felt like we were on a good journey together. I still feel like I'm on that journey and in this space because I invested in it, because I'm here, because this is just a part of my journey. What happens next, we'll see what it looks like. But I am really grateful for people like you, Rebecca, that we can, that you can help me feel like I'm not losing my freaking mind. Can you
You're not
explain,
crazy. No, no, somebody asked me the other day, why do you podcast? I'm like, to help people feel like they're not crazy.
Right.
Honestly, that's it. To and to maybe have some humor about it, laugh so you don't cry, just go through some things, especially somebody of my age. I feel like there's a lot of gaslighting where they say, oh, that never happened, or that was never a policy, or that was never culture. And I think certain people have to speak out and say, no, that was, and you're not crazy. It was. So yeah, I think that's why we're all here, to talk together and to help us all feel a little less crazy together.
I love that. Thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully we will be able to hang out again sometime
I'd love
soon,
to.
and we can
I'd
talk
love
about
to.
something that juices me up a little less. That
Yeah,
that would be, we can have more
exactly.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
like so, something ideally where the church isn't doing some kind of freaky mind control thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the comments in the temple, thank you to everyone who's reached out over these past few months. It has been crazy. I am all good, practicing lots of self-care, lots of being out in nature. And yeah, to those people who've mentioned the temple and stuff, I live in Scotland. This is as good as it gets. Yeah, God's own temple right here. So how much more blessed could I be? We're good. So thank you, everyone. We're going to be back this Monday night. See, we're mixing it up. No one needs to tell us which night we can broadcast. We can just go in like ninjas and surprise you all. So we're going to be back this Monday night, and we've got Community of Christ's presiding bishop, Carla Long, along with Joelle
I
White.
love Carla. Oh my gosh,
Isn't
they're
she
amazing.
a
Yeah, that's
legend, right?
incredible.
Aye, and the most incredible Joelle White is going to be along,
Yeah.
and she spends a lot of time as in Community of Christ working with LDS folks. They're going to be talking a little bit about sacred space, the Kirtland Temple, and what things are going to look like from here on in. So we're excited to be able to have them with us. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We will drop links to your what's going on with the temples playlist. When are you streaming next? When can people see you next?
Let me think. This morning, I dropped an episode. It's a reader's theater of a play written by a former Hill Cumorah pageant director. He was the director for 15 years, but he wrote a play called The Beehive State about post-manifesto polygamy. You can find that over on Mormonish podcast, audio, and video. And it's really interesting, fascinating. And we always drop our episodes to stream on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. So whatever time that would be, Mountain Time for you guys, and also on Fridays at 11 a.m. So we have a bunch of stuff coming up. For example, how to pay tithing the right way. We have a faithful member on that has some takes on that. This will be on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Looking forward to all. So we'll catch you all super soon. If you need us in the chats, you look out. You just look out for the contact us button, and we'll do that. Before I go, and it's actually kind of weird that I'm doing this having left now, but yeah, to still be able to claim the right to just say that Rebecca, all of the work that you have done has impacted on so many. I hang out with women, so I was going to say women, but people, and more broadly, it has impacted on me in great ways. And I just want to bless you that you can just continue to find joy in that work, because you know how much it's helping. And I know that you're going to make a real terms difference to the lives of people who are really confused about what's happening right now. And I mean that in all sorts of ways. So yeah, we bless your journey, and especially your work right now, because it is absolutely invaluable. Thank you so much. And to all of you guys, we will see you in the next episode. Good night.